It's my great pleasure to welcome the eminent historian, Peter Frankopan, to talk about climate crisis. Peter, earlier in the day, spoke about Silk Roads pegged to his two books, The Silk Roads and New Silk Roads. And that was a wonderful session, really found it informative, insightful, as always. And this session is pegged to his book, The Earth Transformed, looking at the anthropogenic shocks to the Earth, man-induced, climate-generated crises that we're all afflicted with. Pakistan is a frontline state as far as climate devastation goes. With floods and climate refugees, we have grave matters to address. And Peter has encapsulated a remarkable history of how human behavior over the years, decades, have shaped the climate debate, and also how do we address it. It's a solution-oriented approach he takes. Frankopan we had earlier in 2017, and that was a strange year when we had to truncate the LLF. Instead of the Alhambra, we had to relocate the entire lecture planned with Peter at a private address. And today, I'm very pleased that we're able to bring Peter to LLF in its entire glory. Peter is a jet setter, a globe trotter, and it's very hard to pin down his itineraries. The reason why we crammed 3 sessions with Peter on a Saturday is entirely because of that. So with that, I really want to give a round of applause to Peter and welcome him to the lectern.
Thank you. Pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you, Razi, and thank you to LLF for bringing me here. It does make me feel quite old. If it was really 2017, that's 8 years ago, yes. It feels maybe not like yesterday, but maybe 1 or 2 weeks ago. Right, I am going to talk. I've got until 4:10, I've been told. Depends how quickly I talk. So if I have a chance, I'll do questions, but I can't promise. But I will be here if you want to ask me something, then great. I'm going to talk a bit about the natural world, how we should think about history in maybe different kinds of ways. I can see some young people. Is anybody here under the age of 21? Oh, look at that. And you're here instead of watching England against Australia. Who thinks that's a good decision? Okay, good, okay. Does anybody know what the score is? Don't tell me the score. If any of you guys, if there's anything I say that you don't understand or you want me to explain, please wave and put your hand up. Don't wait until the end because you'll have forgotten, I'll have forgotten. Okay, it's a pleasure to be back in this beautiful city. Doing my homework coming here to Lahore. I love coming to Pakistan. I've been to Islamabad every year for the last 5 or 6 years. I do my homework about what's happening in Pakistan, and particularly what's happening in the climate space. So here, I just quickly went into the old fort. This is a photo I took about 45 minutes ago, because it's a lovely thing to come to your city and not just meet you all, but to see what's happening. We just had released just now the Climate Risk Index globally, and unfortunately, if you live in Pakistan, the #1 ranked country for most vulnerable to climate change is Pakistan. There's a whole series of reasons for that, partly to do with intense heat, partly to do with floods, I'll say a bit more about this too, partly to do with humanitarian response, partly to do with the economic situation, but there's a reason why I'm here today to talk to you. It's not just about history, although history is important and interesting, it's also about the present and about the future and about climate. So I wrote a book about the Silk Roads, for those of you who are young, which is really about how to think about the past of connections across Asia, but also about the present and the future. And this is really about the second of the 3 major global challenges of today, the environmental and global warming crisis. So at the end, let's see what you think. But anyway, Pakistan sits right at the top of that. Oh yes, that's the wrong direction. And one of the reasons for that is that Lahore ranks #4 in the fastest growing cities per hour in the world. It's not shown on this map, but it's growing incredibly quickly. And urban growth, as all of you who live in Lahore will know, puts pressure on infrastructure, creates challenges for food production, puts pressure on water, has energy demands, air quality, some of these very basic things. So I will talk a bit about some of that too, but it matters in Pakistan, it matters above all here in Lahore. Right, now, history. This is what the world used to look like, right? For a lot longer than any of the history lessons you've had at school. Most of us start with Egypt or the Indus Valley, but our planet has been rotating around the sun for a really very, very long time. 4.5 billion years, in fact. So when you think, when history, you start maybe 3,000 years ago, if you're lucky. If you're really lucky, 4,000 years ago. It's a tiny, tiny fraction of how we think about the past. But when you have history lessons, you don't hear about this. You don't think about the importance of geography. Geography is a different subject to history. So here, some of you young guys, can anybody tell me what this is? Shout. The moon. Who said the moon? Okay, great. The people who didn't put their hands up, what do you think it is? Just a matter of interest. Okay, this is in fact a mocked up picture of the Earth. This is what our planet looked like for more than half of its life, right? A snowball, it's called snowball Earth, covered from north to south pole with ice. And perhaps not surprisingly, our species didn't function very well. In fact, we didn't exist at that time. So the starting point when you think about history, from a biological point of view, from a natural point of view, is that we're all quite lucky to be here, right? And I'll explain why that's important also later. Roughly 99.99% of all species that have ever lived on this planet are extinct. Some of you are doing maths. Has anybody studied maths to a high level? Does anybody bet? Yes, I know you don't need to wave your hands. If you understand the principle of betting, if there's a 0.1% chance of survival, you probably think that's not a good bet to place. So that might make you think differently about how important it is to keep the environmental world around us intact. Right. How important is global climates and climatic change? I'm not going to talk to you about dinosaurs, about geological time. And my book is available. It costs about 100 rupees per 100 million years, which is a pretty good bargain if you ask me. But we sometimes forget about how important geology and geography are in the way we think about history, including human history. So the ways in which the monsoons deliver wind speeds, but also deliver rain, linking East Africa and West Africa across to South Asia is absolutely fundamental. You can't understand the future of Pakistan without understanding how these rain patterns happen. You've had almost no rain here in Pakistan, in Punjab, for more than 6 months. Trying to understand why that's the case would seem to me incredibly important from a food security point of view, from a national security point of view, from an economic point of view, political, social, and so on. But understanding the complicated global climate systems is important. Okay, this is the United States, as you all know. No one spends a great deal of time thinking about this white thin band that goes down the middle of the US. That's roughly where the Rocky Mountains are. Those Rocky Mountains dictate rainfall in Portugal, Spain, Northern Europe, Scandinavia, Northern Russia. So how much water comes across, and this acts as a barrier, by the way, between the east and the western parts of the United States, affects our climates in Europe. And in fact, they are global climates too. When you see this, as if you're a student or if you're a policymaker, you'd think the right place to be growing food in the United States would be in the bits where it rains, because you need water for photosynthesis. And unfortunately, about 40% of American fruit and vegetable production is in the areas that are red. So that's happened because people started to plant crops there 100 years ago when there were fewer of us, and we didn't understand this so well. Right, why does this matter? Well, it matters because understanding where natural resources are explains all sorts of things. So some of you, I know it's a cricket nation, but some of you will be familiar with the idea of football, right? The best team in the world today, it's not my view, and in fact, I don't know if the Spanish ambassador's here, our top team got knocked out by Real Madrid on Wednesday night, has been Manchester City. It's the best team in the world because it's won all the trophies last year. If you were to ask most people why Manchester City is the best football team in England, they will tell you, it doesn't matter, cricket's the same thing, don't worry, they've got the best players, they've got the best staff, they've got the best coaches, they've got the best diets, they've got the best medical care. The reason why Manchester City is the best football team in the world at the moment is because 230 million years ago, there was a profound moment of climate change that created the world's great hydrocarbon basins. That's the places where we find coal, oil, and gas. As it so happens, I'm sorry it's a bit fuzzy this one of the great hydrocarbon basins is located under the sand and the sea of Abu Dhabi. And because exploitation of these resources has become easier over the last 30 years, the wealth that the UAE has to invest in all sorts of things. If you're a cricket fan, the best stadiums in the world. Tomorrow, there's a reason why India are playing Pakistan, or Pakistan are playing India in Dubai. Because you can build infrastructure if you have resources. The same way you could look at the reason why there's a war in Ukraine. There's been a lot of discussion about Trump last week saying that in return for peace in Ukraine, which he's offering to give Ukraine, anyway, that's a different story, a different talk, but in return he wants half of Ukraine's mineral resources. Okay? So the location of where these things are based explains the present. Russia's oil, Russia's gas in particular, has been crucial for European energy supplies. So when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, about 60% of all German energy came from Russian gas and oil. That's not because Putin is clever or the Russians are clever, it's because of climate change that happened hundreds of millions of years ago that left these deposits. Understanding the world of today is really important to understand the world of yesterday. Right, I'm going to keep walking over here to aim at the laptop. There we go. It's the same thing for coal. These are the coal maps of the United States, the great coal fields. And I'm not going to keep talking about climate change in the past, but the reason why America, the United States, was originally founded on the East Coast. We had the Spanish in Florida. Eventually the English went up to the north. The reason why population started to move westwards was in search of resources, in particularly coal. And what happened as a result of that coal is that railways started to be built. Not because more people wanted to live in Chicago, St. Louis, Omaha, because this is where coal was located. After that, wheat fields started to open up, and these railways brought resources back to the East Coast, and they did it so efficiently that in 1850, it was cheaper to send a ton of wheat from Chicago to London than from Dublin to London. So Ireland and the UK are extremely close. So the ways in which populations have been settled, infrastructure has been built, have been based on natural resources. In this case, it's the same story with South Asia. Where the locations of railways being built was connected to natural resources in what's India and Pakistan. You're seeing, if I wave at you, you can, brilliant, okay. We've solved it. Right. The same way, the Great Trunk Road, of which you can see Lahore here, famously, these cities heading northwards, Islamabad, Kabul, Chandigarh, were all part of networks that particularly helped bring horses from Central Asia down towards the markets in Bengal. So all of our ways in which we've created transport networks are very closely connected to natural resources. There's a reason why horses came from Central Asia, which is that there's lots of space for them to live and grow. And the climate suits pasturage of animals much better than it does in South Asia. Horse markets we know in northern India, and what's now Punjab, Pakistan, horses did exist, but they were much smaller. The ones that were most prized came from further north. So all of our ways in which we've joined connections together, it's not just about silk and gold and expensive things, it's about natural resources of all kinds. Right. Now I'm going to give you just a quick overview of the distant past. When we start to think about history in a different way, and we think about resources, climate, the natural world, of course it makes sense that we all want to live in the best possible locations, right? We want to live in places where you can grow crops, where there's water, where you don't have infectious diseases that are damaging, and where you've got energy supplies. Those four are the sort of building blocks, the proteins, the DNA of what we need. And as our common ancestors started to fan out from Africa, they were all looking for the best possible places to settle. That was hugely important, and most of our common ancestors who left Africa looking for environmental niches died out. They didn't survive. The few that did are all of our descendants, we're all their descendants today. It's not surprising then that the first great places that people settled were places you all have heard of, in the Nile, the Fertile Crescent, in Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, in the Indus Valley, and in the Yellow and Yangtze River. And there's a reason, if you read my book, there's a reason why in these places, cities start to get built. Not just they're good places for people to live, but because they get squeezed into locations together. So here you have unlimited capability to grow food, but they act like funnels. Eventually, you find cities starting to be created. In some places like Mohenjo-daro, in the Indus Valley, very unusual, cities work with much lower levels of inequality. People are much fairer in the Indus Valley. Now, because I'm a guest of you here in Lahore in Pakistan, I'd say it's because the people here are so nice. Or people are very kind. And therefore, I didn't say that was right, but anyway. Do you know what, when I was in the Lahore fort, a lady came up to me and said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I come from England." She went, "Welcome to my beautiful country, Pakistan." And I was here with Karam. I said, "No one says that to you when you come to England," but that's a different story. The reason why Indus Valley was more equal, and we know that because houses are roughly the same size, normally rich people try to get hold of the best bit of real estate, nearest the water, best land, and you keep hold of it. That's what happens in Egypt, pharaohs. That's what happens in Mesopotamia, kings. That's something in the Yellow and Yangtze River. It doesn't happen here, and there's an ecological reason. The ecological reason is that the water that comes down the Indus and the Saraswati rivers carries so much sediment that the force of the water changes the course every year, or every couple of years. That means that you don't know which is going to be the best place to live. So it means that societies function in slightly different ways because cooperation works differently, right? So understanding the Indus Valley civilizations, fertility symbols, the kinds of things you maybe were learning about in school, will teach you a bit about how cities come into being. And when you have cities, you have the next two most important things. You have social hierarchy, you have rulers, rich people, but also you have gender roles become different. Cities imprison women. That's the normal story until about 100 years ago. In some parts of the world, still gender equality is a different story elsewhere. Because what happens is the control of assets being passed down families tends to create a system where men become dominant. And men become dominant because they monopolize military virtues and valor. So being brave, having great biceps is important, but also because you can codify who owns what. And that's why these scripts start to get written down, to record who owns land. So it can be passed from generation to generation, and so that the ruler can work out who to tax. So we have cuneiform, we have Indus Valley scripts, Linear A, or scripts from Crete, which look like they are designed to be able to codify and protect the wealth of the elites. That happens in conjunction with agriculture, because all societies until the Industrial Revolution, some still here today, including many places in Pakistan, are driven by agricultural production. If you own land that produces food that you can sell, you can generate surpluses, you can generate wealth, you can barter, you can have power. And so control over these resources is important. So some of you, I'm talking to young people, but everybody here will know about the worries of water shortages in Pakistan and in Central Asia, and about glacier melt in particular. I'm doing a big project at the moment on what happens to the Central Asian glaciers, particularly in Pakistan, but also across Central Asia. And people warning about there will be water wars in the future. I don't know if you've heard about water wars. Well, this is a guy called Gudeh. He was a ruler of a state called Lagash in Mesopotamia. These states fought a water war 4,000 years ago that lasted for 150 years. Right? You find these echoes in the past of disputes over water, food, land, and so on. So when you find cities, you find hierarchies, you find elites, you find kings that start to take power, and then quite soon cities start to build walls. Young or old, why does anybody build a wall around a city? I love it, everyone's shy. Protection, right? That sounds completely logical. This is a reconstructed wall in Babylon, but this is a sign of the size and scale of walls from about 4,000 years ago. These walls are far too big for any form of projectile or any kind of weapon to damage. So we know these walls are not just built for protection, because they're bigger than they need to be. So archaeologists have a lot of discussion about what the purpose of these walls might be. So defense, of course, is part of it. One idea is that, well, it's a bit like somebody bringing in a new cricket bat to school. Then everybody has to get a new cricket bat. So one king builds a wall like this, and everyone goes, oh, our city looks terrible compared to yours, so there's a competition. And that sounds to me quite logical. Cities, they do compete. Look at your beautiful Lahore. There's a reason to build mosques. There's a reason to build palaces. There's a reason to build water features that are better than anything else, to show the wealth and the prestige, not just of the ruler, but of the city inhabitants. So that sounds to me right. But there's another idea that we've been working on, a bunch of archaeologists, for the last 15 years, that actually what these walls also do, doesn't have to be one or the other. Maybe it's all of these ideas, but one really important thing that these walls do, they don't just keep people out, they keep people in. Because if you have a state that's based on agriculture, you need to have people who will work. And the best form of work you can have is work that's free. So prisoners of war, women, those who don't get paid for their work is the top choice you can have if you're a ruler, because then you don't have to pay for it. Second choice is to make sure that you've got a workforce that doesn't go and work anywhere else. So these walls are about trapping people inside cities, imprisoning them. It's fascinating thinking about the role that agriculture plays. Quite soon with cities, you then have people who start to interpret the divine. They try to explain, why are we here? Questions that all religions ask. What is the purpose of life? What happens when we die? Why do sometimes good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people? And all of our different global religions have different answers to these questions. Sometimes they have very similar answers to these questions. But one thing that happens is if you are one of the people who answers them, if you're a holy person, holy woman, or more normally a holy man, an imam or a priest, whatever it might be, you are very strongly incentivized to protect knowledge, to codify it, to write it down, to protect, let's say, the Holy Quran, or the Holy Bible, or the Vedic texts, or texts in China, to make sure that there's one truth, one story, because that also presents power. And so priests in different types of religions quite often start to build their power, and they start to build big temples like this one behind me. And temples generate offerings. People come and bring and they leave. And my favorite one in Mesopotamia is a goddess who gets very angry if you don't bring her enough beer. One more, please. One more. She gets angry if you don't bring enough beer. And one more, too. Thank you. These are sacred texts written down. Yeah, thank you. Here, this is in Teotihuacan. I took this photo 2 or 3 years ago, hovering over the great temples of what's now the Valley of Mexico. Priests are really good at translating their power into wealth and finding a way to, this is Cleopatra, it's not that quite yet. One more, yeah, great. They find a very good way of getting control over power. And one of the questions that all religions asks, and I hadn't properly thought about that before I started writing this book about 10 years ago, is I knew that religions are all about what happens to our lives, what is the purpose of our existence, why is God, why should we behave in one way or the other. I hadn't properly understood that the story in all religions has a very strong ecological, environmental context. So the Garden of Eden, the starting point of humankind for Muslims, for Jews, for Christians, is a story about the environment and about environmental change. So Adam and Eve are placed in a garden by the good Lord, by God, by Allah, by Yahweh, and are told, you must obey God's commandment. And God keeps it very easy to start with. He says, there's only one command, which is respect me and don't eat the apple. And when Adam and Eve eat the forbidden fruit, the punishment for Adam and Eve and for all of us is environmental. Expulsion from the Garden of Eden means humans have to worry about food. They have to worry about the sun beating too hard. They have to worry about terrible floods. The great flood of Noah, again, in the Torah, in the Quran, in the Old Testament, where all humanity is wiped out by an angry God as punishment for our sins. So these ideas about religion, same in the Hindu traditions, same in Chinese traditions, same in Mesoamerica, have such an important idea about why do environmental catastrophes happen. And they're always linked to how humans behave. And those of you who are environmental activists, are any of you think of yourselves as environmental activists? Right. It's a similar story, which is that humans are too stupid. There will be punishment. That punishment will be apocalyptic. There will be mass starvation. There will be millions of people dying of hunger. There will be disease, there will be pestilence, and you deserve it because humans thought in the short term. And now, if those of you here this morning, I can't tell you what's going to happen in the future, but people have been worried about that since the beginning of writing scripts. And we know that because we have these texts. But it's interesting to me that environmental concerns, worries about biodiversity, worries about food, worries about water, worries about extreme weather events, is something that is both universal, we find in every culture, but also as old as writing happens. We've always thought about this. Right, Razi said that I was going to talk about anthropogenic and climate changes in the past. I'm going to give you 3 or 4 different examples. I'm going to tell you about the present day and then maybe some questions. So, researching my book, I was interested about whether there have been past episodes of major climate change. And one of the things I write about quite often is the role that volcanoes play. Partly because, let's face it, volcanoes are really quite cool, right? Unless you happen to live near one, or if you're alive when one erupts. So in the last couple of weeks, we've had some pretty big trembles in a couple of places we look at. I'm doing a project with volcanologists about using AI to try to work out more surveillance of uncharted volcanoes. It's hugely important. But in the year 40, this guy here, this is one of the great British contributions to world culture. These are the Carry On films, which if you're my age, you'll know what they are, and you're English, and Pakistani, but if you're younger, you might not, but they're sort of slapstick comedies. So here's a picture of Elizabeth Taylor, who's not in the Carry On films, acting as Cleopatra, and here is Mark Antony and Julius Caesar. You will know, even here in Pakistan, the story of Julius Caesar wanted to become king. He's murdered by his generals by the members of the Senate, I should say, because he has ideas too big for his boots. That's the story that you get told. In fact, what happens that's more important is that a few months after Julius Caesar gets murdered, there's a massive volcanic eruption in Alaska. And the eruption is so vast, it injects all volcanoes that inject a lot of debris up into the atmosphere that can block the sun's rays. And because the sulfur particles, the aerosols ejected upwards, they react with water in the atmosphere, in the stratosphere, and they reflect the sun's rays back into space. And that can have catastrophic impacts on photosynthesis. In the Nile, which is where this lady was queen, brilliantly clever. She was the first Egyptian ruler who could speak Egyptian. She spoke 7 languages, incredibly astute political operator. She's about the only woman that gets written about in antiquity, by the way. Her problem is that how does she deal with the fact that in the floods, the Nile flood doesn't happen, agricultural production collapses. When agricultural collapse happens, what happens to prices, you young people? Prices go up. When prices of food go up, you have inflation. When you have inflation, you have a balance of interest rates. You know about this all in Pakistan, right? Costs go up, revenues go down, and you can be left with a disastrous set of political choices. And in Egypt, there are rebellions against Queen Cleopatra, not because she's a woman, so far as we can tell. There's a reaction because she's an outsider. Her ancestors are Greek generals who served with Alexander the Great, who got to here where we are in Lahore, who were left in charge of Egypt for the 300 years after Alexander had died. And because she was an outsider, there was the rebellions that she struggled to cope with. So Cleopatra makes an alliance with this guy here on the left, and she bets on the wrong Roman. In fact, they both get outmaneuvered by a man called Octavian, who conquers Egypt. They die, maybe with a snake bite, maybe they commit suicide, we don't know. But the Romans then take over the province of Egypt. And Egypt is by far the richest granary or wheat producer of the whole of the Mediterranean. And it changes Rome from being a local, small city-state into a global empire. And the Senate in Rome are so happy, they say to Octavian, we're going to give you a new name, Augustus, which more or less means you lucky man, you've been blessed. And it's no surprise today that one of the world's most powerful and richest men today has Augustus as his role model, Mark Zuckerberg. Obsessed by Augustus. If you've seen him recently, he's modeling the Augustus hairstyle, right? This is all real. I mean, it's why history is such a fantastically interesting subject. Why would Mark Zuckerberg be interested in Augustus? How does he see the parallels? Is it really the same? If Augustus did this in Egypt, what was Facebook's equivalent or Meta's equivalent? So it's fascinating. But the point is that this climate event helped accelerate a set of problems. It didn't cause the downfall of Egypt. But what happens as a result of Rome taking control of Egypt is it opens up trade routes into the Indian Ocean, starts to trade with the Swat Valley, with the Kushan, Central Asians who come down into what's now Balochistan and into Punjab, as well as with the coastal areas of what's now India. That all happens as a result of a set of factors where volcanoes play a role. And that's really exciting and important. Same thing happens with something called the Black Death, which is one of the great events, not just in European history, but in history of the Middle East, and almost certainly in this part of the world too. So we know that in the 1300s, a pathogen, Yersinia pestis, is a pathogen that underlies plague, spreads across through trade routes. It spreads along networks created by the Mongols. Mongols were fantastic, despite what you might hear about them. They're a very interesting group who are bringing all sorts of tolerances that we don't tend to think about, but leads to infectious disease spreading across the Middle East, across Europe, and almost certainly into South Asia, China, and West Africa, but we haven't had the genetic data to tell us about that until about 3 or 4 years ago. Population losses, about 40 or 50%. So in the case of Pakistan today, that's 100 million people dead, right? These kinds of events, they come up reasonably regularly. Something changes that makes this pathogen spread. Probably, again, and it's a paper that was published by a colleague of mine on Wednesday, so it's brand new, although because I'm very lucky to work in the world I do, because I'd seen a preprint, I managed to write about it in my book that came out 2 years ago. So that's like Lionel Messi. That's kind of good reaction times. I should say Cristiano Ronaldo to be Portuguese, yes. But this is triggered by the fact that another eruption, this time in 1258 in Indonesia, forces animals that carry plague closer to human beings. And then it starts to spread, because when we travel, when I come to Lahore, or you come to see me in England, I don't just bring you ideas about fashion. I don't know what you think about my blue outfit today, but we bring new ideas with us. We bring new tastes. We bring new music. But we also cough. We also have things that jump in our luggage with us that can be damaging. And if I'd said that when I came to Lahore in 2017, it wouldn't have made so much sense. But because of the pandemic, you all know that a single event that happens in one single city leads to global lockdown, interest rate inflation, economic pressures, social change, political disruption, all as a result of changes to environmental and natural worlds. In this particular case, a spillover event of a zoonotic disease from bats to humans. And by the way, we see those almost on a daily basis. About a new coronavirus establishes roughly every 24 hours. So these things are all around us. We just don't spend a great deal of time thinking about them. Anyway, Black Death was one of those. Yes, I don't have time for that one. I'm afraid we've got to keep moving. Okay, I'm going to keep moving. Okay, the back one. Okay. But back one more, please. Okay, back one more. I think we've gone the wrong way. No, other direction, other way. Oh, you're spoiling it all. Back, other way. Reverse, yeah, more, one more. Okay, great. Please ask me about the Islamic Empire and the spread of the Great Abbasid Caliphate. After the followers of the Prophet Muhammad, one of the things that happens when you spread empires, I said you bring ideas. They brought architecture, musical forms from the Middle East, from places like Syria particularly, into North Africa, into Spain. So when you go to Spain, you're in Sevilla and you listen to flamenco music, the instruments that are being played on, the types of tonalities, the types of architecture, all have very long connections to other parts of the world. Ideas, they spread when people move around, including environmental ideas and about how to do water, irrigation across fields, of which the Arabs were the best at that time. You also have times of great stability. I mentioned when you have volcanoes and eruptions, sometimes you have times where things are stable and things work well together. From about the year 800 onwards, we find a period of about 300 years of limited shocks. They occasionally happen, but they're very small scale. But instead we have a world that starts to become warmer, globally averaged, and that means that fish start to move further north in search of cold water. That encourages Viking expansion to Iceland and into North America. Next slide, please. And at the same time, you can see these bars here. The ones I'm really looking for are the blue and the green ones. You see also expansion of people into the South Pacific, looking for water sources and new resources because environmental conditions are changing. So there's adaptation, there's resilience, there are new technologies to explore these islands. It's amazing. These look to me impossible. You can't see them from each other. They're miles apart. But we've used AI modeling and can tell that these islands in blue and green are not discovered by chance. They are specific expeditions that intentionally set out to go and chart and explore. So the ways in which the environment and new resources play a role in global history is hugely important. To the point that when you think about, I mentioned slavery before, I always wanted to understand why is it that the southern part of the United States was so dominated by slavery and not the north. People in the north, they're enlightened, they're racially tolerant, that's what they'll tell you. The reason why slavery became so established in the southern part of the United States is because these lands here, particularly in the southeastern part of the US, was underwater for tens of millions of years. And as global sea levels sank, billions of small creatures left their skeletons in chalk that made these fields incredibly fertile. Black soil, it's called. They have that in Ukraine as well. Same reason, one of the reasons why Putin's invaded Ukraine, the rich Chernozem, the soils. These areas in red are the ones that have the highest concentrations of slaves, enslaved peoples. They're also the ones that have the highest concentration of soil fertility. So you exploit the land that's most valuable. As it happens, in these red squares, that's where there are, not surprisingly, the most descendants of enslaved peoples today. And their voting patterns in US elections have been decisive in getting the result of every single American presidential election since 1912. So the past, deep past, the present, the future, all dovetail together. Even when it comes to thinking about resources, we're coming up to the 250th anniversary of the United States next year. The reason why the United States became independent, declared independence from Britain. This is tea produced by the East India Company, shipped from ports in South Asia to Boston, being tipped into the water, from China, being shipped from East India Company, being tipped into the water in Boston Harbor, is a function of the fact that American entrepreneurs had been stopped from sending goods and selling goods to the Caribbean in the 5 to 10 years before the American Revolution. Americans tell you, what they get taught is independence is about wanting to stay away from tyranny. Americans, they don't want a single all-powerful leader or lots of rich guys around the leader who can tell people what to do. I'm just saying. They wanted a state that everybody could be equal in. That has some echoes, of course, for today. But the actual reason why America became independent was because the storm damage in Cuba, in Jamaica, and the Caribbean islands was so great that Spanish in particular, but also French businesses and people were willing to spend 10 times the average amounts on things like rope and iron. And the British government refused to let the North American colonies sell. So the first meeting of Congress in the United States was not to talk about independence. The first meeting was to agree that Americans should be allowed to trade with whoever they wanted. And when that right got taken, or sat on by the government in London, the wealthy Americans who described this moment as not just a once in a lifetime, but a once in a generation, sorry, not just once in a generation, once in a lifetime opportunity to become rich, took matters into their own hands. All to do, there they are, signing the Declaration of Independence, yes. All of that to do with storms in the Caribbean, all to do with natural resources, all to do with opportunism. So when you start to build all these things that I wasn't taught about in my history lessons, this one, the volcano in Lombok, erupted in 1815, helped make Europe more democratic. Why? Because it created in Europe something called the year without the summer. Crops failed, there were riots. Eventually, police in Manchester opened fire on crowds in Manchester, killing them, that led to government reforms that widened. It didn't produce democracy, but it widened the number of people who were allowed to vote. It changed, this volcanic eruption, changed the microbiotic makeup of the Bay of Bengal that helped cholera spread into South Asia, and then from South Asia, infectious disease through Kumela first, but also through the Hajj. Catastrophic spread, because when people travel, they bring diseases with them, all to do with a volcano. Yeah, another one, please. And then, of course, famines in South Asia, which we can talk about in the discussion if you'd like to, but the impacts in the 19th and 20th centuries, both in Punjab, but also elsewhere, to do with the ways in which this area was resettled or settled by the English colonies at the turn of the 1900s. The movement of people from other parts of India into Punjab, which has, of course, modern-day implications, not just because of partition, but because of the land-carrying load that one of the fastest-growing cities in the world places on ecosystems around us. Right. So that's a sort of historical overview. I'm now going to do 10 minutes on the present day, and then questions. Am I speaking too? I've had a bit of coffee today. Am I speaking too fast? It's all okay. All right. Good. Okay. I can tell there's silence. Silence when you give a speech is either quite a good thing, because it means people are really gripped, or they're all looking at their watch, checking the score in the cricket. Okay. Right. Where are we today? Well, every single one of us in this room is living in a. I'd be grateful if you didn't film. Actually, I don't like having things filmed when I'm talking. We are all living in conditions. All of us in this room, and everyone on this planet, living in conditions that no human has ever lived in. That's quite sobering. So some of you will have strong opinions about climate change. It's not true, it's not a big deal, who cares? Some of you won't be able to sleep at night, but I'm a historian, so I'm not here to encourage you to or change your minds, but I can tell you we have higher global average temperatures than any point for the last 800,000 years. Right? And if you're familiar with the idea of dinosaurs or other species, if your environment changes, you don't survive. You either have to adapt or you don't make it. So that's number one. Number two, yes, next please. We also have not just the fastest rising temperatures globally at the moment, but also severe heat waves that are coming on a regular basis. You know this here in Pakistan. Last year we had some of the worst heat waves, not just in the modern age, ever recorded, including warming of ocean temperatures. So in Florida in 2023, ocean temperatures reached 38 degrees, so almost as warm as the human body. That's about the temperature of a hot tub or a hot bath, right? That's hot. And that means the impacts on marine life, there's adaptation. So we can measure how animal species either are dying out or changing their habitats by moving further north or south, or by swimming lower in the water. We have also the highest carbon dioxide concentrations globally for at least 2 million years. Right? This is the chart that's been going up. I was born here. We had 320 parts per million of carbon dioxide. Now, as of last week, we're about 425. Right? That changes not just conditions for us. Of course, that changes conditions for everything. There are winners and losers. But the point is, this is unprecedented. And historians don't like to use that word too often because it sounds too dramatic, but we've never done this before. So anticipating the consequences is hard, of higher water temperatures, and so on. Some of these numbers, the speed at which they're moving, is reasonably frightening. So in the Paris Accords, we were just above 1 degree of warming above the industrial era. We went past that last year comfortably. Some of the projections for the end of this century are, enough to make you turn off the lights. You young people, I bet you don't do that. Or turn off the air conditioning when you're not at home. Or perhaps move the air conditioning up a degree or two. Saudi Arabia uses about 750,000 barrels per day just on air conditioning. If you can moderate from 18 degrees up to 20 degrees, apart from the fact you use less energy, do you know who else will be happy? Women. Because air conditioning temperatures set by standards in the United States are optimized for male productivity, which should be about 18 to 19 degrees. Women's body temperatures function optimally at a higher temperature. So, in fact, all these things like car seat belts, all designed for men and stop men from breaking their collarbones, don't do the same gender-wise too. Here in Pakistan, just looking back through your last 12 months, at 52.4 degrees centigrade, it's hard to know how you should be preparing for this being normal. The heat waves that you had first in May and then in July last year, you got through them. But they have long-term consequences that we need to think through, particularly when about 2 months before you had some of the coldest conditions here in Pakistan. So you're not just having to cope with extreme warmth, not to mention floods, but you're having to deal with two ends of the spectrum. And to give one example of how difficult this is, I was in Central Asia in December 2023, so about just over a year ago, and I was there, it was minus 35, which is roughly normal for that time of year in that part of the world. 4 days later, temperature went up by 25 degrees in 4 days. The whole of the Northern Hemisphere in the middle of December 2023 was 20 degrees warmer than normal, than average. That has consequences for our crops, for our food, our water, for ice melt, you name it. It also affects these complex, interrelated global climate systems, these patterns of monsoons, hurricanes, the North Atlantic Oscillation, the signatures of La Nina, El Nino, which is the dominant climate signal. They're very complicated, they're unpredictable, they're not completely easy to understand, but they all intermesh. But the aggravation is obviously important. So we see the rise of terrible storms, which means that, for example, as in Pakistan in 2022 when you had the floods, the ways in which you train humanitarian first responders has to change, because if you're lifting buildings off people who are submerged, it's a different set of skills, different equipment you need to earthquake response. How you think about what comes next in terms of water supplies too, hugely important. So mega droughts is one of the key things to be thinking about. So at a conference last year at the UN, for those of you who are not diplomats, chooses its language always very carefully, partly because getting people to agree is not easy. But so it's always generally on the sort of safe side of how things are phrased. The UN last year called global water consumption vampiric, right? And vampires are the worst kind of bats, I promise. Vampires are the worst kinds of bats. About 3.5 billion people, that's half the world's population, are severely water stressed for at least 1 month per year. Now, that's fine if weather somehow goes back to normal, if we go back to a status quo like the olden days. But if we're at the point of things that are accelerating, we need to be thinking quite hard about how to change some of that. So mega droughts are becoming more frequent and becoming more severe. The days between billion-dollar, it's not hard to see here, not easy to see, the days between billion-dollar disaster events is narrowing down from had been a couple of months, now happening almost every 2 weeks globally. And those affect everything. Those affect the poor, those affect the people who are in marginalized communities, those affect minorities, and in fact they affect all of us because it changes our insurance, it changes our business models, it changes our ability to be able to cope. And some of the metrics we're seeing, for example, not just in Pakistan, but here in China, for example, this is the median line of water supplies. This is how much is available in parts of China, including in Beijing. So the world's largest infrastructure program at the moment, if I'm not mistaken, it's not Belt and Road, it's about a north-south canal bringing water from the southern part of China to the north. That month that I mentioned in December, 2023 in the Northern Hemisphere, the temperature differential between the north and the south of China at that time was more than 80 degrees centigrade. So it was 50 degrees in the south and minus 30 in the north. So that's very hard to build a common market around, but water is something that is hugely significant. I'll explain a few things why, and then there may be some questions. Yeah. Okay. Another one, please. Deforestation obviously links to biodiversity loss. I'm sure there'll be questions. Another one, please. Yeah. Okay. I have to keep going. Deforestation, mangroves. It's all about the wide change. I want to just finish on water. Yes, please. Yeah. So you know this because you live here. South Asia water shortages. Yep. I've got too many slides for my thing. Okay. Here, back one. Back one more. So here's the trajectory of water stress in Pakistan. Right? That's the thing, if I was here advising your government, I'd be most worried about. Deforestation is important, biodiversity loss, no problem. But the level at which absolute water scarcity is being reached is critical. So new technologies might be able to help with some of this, but it's also a big challenge. Partly because it's not just the abundance of water, it's also the quality. So here in this red, this is water that carries arsenic, which is not a good thing to drink for your long-term, not just your long-term health, but for your long-term cognitive abilities. So poisoned groundwater, it's not just availability of water, it's about wider pollutions too. Now, why does that matter today? It matters today because we're going through the fastest urbanization in human history by far. Not just here in Lahore, the fourth fastest growing city per hour in the world, but because of the growth of megacities, particularly in Asia. Asia is an area that I work on, has 4 billion people, which is more than all the other continents combined. That pressure on cities comes in two waves. On the one hand, property is in scarce demand, it's scarce supply, so people live more modestly in smaller places, tightly together, but they use more energy, they use more water, they use more electricity, they consume more things. So those pressures of the environment, it's not just about global warming and climate change, it's about how we're choosing to live, how we're managing to live. These big megacities are critical in trying to understand the world of today and tomorrow, particularly because what happens in cities, people burn fuel to survive. They need to. Yeah. So we have pollution levels across, South Asia, which are, they shorten people's life expectancies. In Delhi right now, average lives are 8 years shorter than they would be if air met World Health Organization standards. Thank you. So this morning I checked today's daily air forecast. This is this morning in Lahore. And currently all of us in this city, in this room, are breathing air that is 18 times the World Health Organization standards for being safe. And those air qualities, those particulates that we breathe in, they affect our brain tissue, they affect our organ function, they affect the ways in which we have, a lot of my colleagues argue that there are interpersonal violence levels are correlated to pollutants, but the ways in which we try and fix some of this stuff is really, really important and really critical. So I always, my wife says, always end on an upbeat and happy note so people don't disappear and get very upset. I mean, here in Pakistan, the renewable discussion is one that I know you're having, and long may that continue. Yeah. There's my book. I'll finish on this one. Yes. People like me in universities, our job is to find problems and then solve them. That's why you young people are at school. That's why everybody in this room went to school. It's to try to find out how can we work out what's going wrong and how to fix it. And if you want to feel positive, then here's the best way to feel positive, which is we've never had a problem this big. That means that all the things we can be doing to slow down warming, to improve biodiversity, to do more about recycling, more about renewables, the more uses of AI, there are all sorts of ways in which we're going to make a lot of the terrible things that we might forecast much better. In fact, some of my colleagues are now working not on slowing down global warming, but on reversing it. We have the technologies to do that. Do we have the scale? Do we have the global commitment? Do we have the ability to do that? How do we do that in conversation with less developed countries and less developed economies that's fair? But there are lots of ways of thinking about how one can learn from the past. And my final story is one of the great contributions that the British made, apart from introducing the rules of cricket. And also, we have the best crisps in the world. I don't want to have any argument about that. the British do the best crisps, is that we produced a man called Andrew Lloyd Webber. And Andrew Lloyd Webber wrote a musical called Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat that's quite well known. That's a story that, again, is one that's known in all of the Abrahamic faiths. It's an important story about how one man, his brothers are taken into captivity by the leader of Egypt, tells the leader of Egypt when there are 7 years of plenty, 7 in religious speak just means lots, make sure that you put stuff aside for when things become bad. Those kinds of discussions around food resilience, around water availability, around energy infrastructure, around pathogen pandemic response, we need to think about those as building blocks for global international cooperation, and not enough is being done in any of those areas. So some of you here would have had they called it the AstraZeneca vaccine. Did you have AstraZeneca here in Pakistan? Okay, you should be calling that the Oxford University vaccine, because that's where it was developed, and that's who paid for it. But the AstraZeneca vaccine team was led by my colleague Sarah Gilbert in Oxford. I did an event with her at the end of last year, and the discussion was about whether we are better prepared today than we were when COVID struck. And her one-word answer, I'm going to let you guess what that was. No. So history doesn't help explain the future. It can help you understand how we got there, but there are some really fundamental and important lessons that we should be thinking about around ecosystems, around environmental sustainability, around resilience, and perhaps most important of all, around planning. So I'll leave you on that cheery, happy note. I know we've got about 5 minutes, so maybe I can do 3 or 4 questions all in one go, but I've covered quite a lot of ground. Great. There are lots of young people. Can we get a microphone up to young people? And anybody who thinks they're young who'd like to ask? Gentleman here looks like he's young. Yes. But let's start with a group here. And I will keep talking until I'm dragged off the stage. As it happens, I'm on the next panel anyway, so maybe chairs could be set up alongside so I can make sure everybody's happy. Yeah. And please, you kids are all great, because I know you're going to ask questions, but for more grown-up ones, I'm not here for comments, only questions. Yes?
Okay. Good evening. I hope you are doing well. I'm a student from Lahore Grammar School Defense, and I just wanted to ask, as the climate change situation continues to worsen, with you even mentioning earlier in your speech that Pakistan is one of the main countries affected by...
Number one.
The number one country affected by climate change. Do you believe that there may be a future mass migration in store for Pakistan?
Great question. Next. Gosh, I love it. All you young... No, my students don't ask questions. Okay, great.
Yes. Good afternoon. I'm also a student from Lahore Grammar School Defense. Firstly, thank you so much for enlightening us about climate change in the most engaging way possible. My question is, what are the potential impacts of climate change on Pakistan's national security, knowing that we have water scarcity and we have a water issue with India?
Okay.
And is our national security at stake due to climate change?
Great. Okay. Pass it back. I'm afraid we're not going to get too many in. I'll take one then, and I'll get the gentleman here. You might have to shout without a microphone. Yeah. Whoever's got it. Yeah, hand it back. Let these kids could be sitting on, yeah. Okay.
Good evening. So what I wanted to ask was, so in light of the discussion you've brought forth regarding geopolitical implications shaping our global trajectory, would you concur that human history is merely a precedence of reactionary measures that we have taken in light of these implications?
Say that again? It's a...
Would you concur, would you concur that human history is a precedence of reactionary measures that we have taken in light of these implications?
Reactionary measures. Okay, and gentlemen here, yeah, please shout ahead. Yeah. If you can't hear, I'm getting compliments. Yeah. Just the question, sir. Yeah. Okay. What's my purpose? Great. Okay. Okay. What's the purpose? Whatever's going to happen, as Doris Day said, que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be. Right. Migration. Lots of my colleagues write about migration. They are convinced that that's what's going to happen. Historically, that's not what happens. Historically, when there's humanitarian catastrophe, people try and stay as close to their homes and their families as they can, and they suffer. So usually in quite predictable ways, but normally people don't migrate. It's true today, there are different capabilities, cars, trucks, planes, which we didn't have in the past. It's probably no coincidence, and we spoke about it this morning, all over the world, those barriers to keep people out are going up quite fast. So I'm very skeptical that migration will be an issue. On national security, I mean, you might be, I mean, I don't know what your view would be, but that's my working assumption. National security, yeah, it's a huge challenge and a problem. And if I was on your National Security Council, I'd be doing some quite intensive modelling around what resources we need to be building up and how to pay for them. And in Pakistan's case, because the IMF bailout and the demands being placed on deregulation across different sectors, a lot will depend on what capabilities the government has here, even if it is able to make those kinds of decisions. But it's a critical point, not only because Pakistan is the #1 ranked, most stressed and exposed to climate change, so that's a real challenge. It was about reactions, about human reactions, is that right? Okay, that's the kind of question I set in exams, and only an idiot would try and answer it. So it's a very, very good question, and I won't be able to do justice to your answer, but I will wait for me, and I will come and talk to you about it so I understand better, because I think what you're saying is that we are actors on a stage that we don't really have any agency, right? So I'll give a better answer to that without rushing it in 10 seconds, so don't go away. It's almost what the gentleman here is saying, which is, okay, #1, why do I bother? Okay, there are 3 reasons. #1, I've been invited by LLF, who I love, and when Razi and LLF asked me to come here, to have a chance to come and share not just my research, but world-class research that is done by my colleagues. It's not just a privilege, it's an obligation, right, to share this stuff. Second, policy is really important. Some of you in this room will be involved in policy shaping. Some of you will be close to policymakers. Some of you might become policymakers, but all of you are voters. So the ways in which you react and the way in which you have your hierarchy of what you think is important is really significant. And third, there are ways in which you can influence and shape not just public debate, but I'm involved in lots of different things around strategic planning at government level and at intergovernment level. So with things like the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank or the UN, where the desire for ideas is ravenous. There's a huge demand to work out what can we do, what comes first, and how to get things done. So my job is, and then that's the fourth one, I'm a historian. It's a joy to research the past. It doesn't have to tell you about tomorrow, but I love what I do, and I love the subjects of looking at them in different ways. So, when I was a young student, I never thought I'd have to understand geology, plant sciences, disease, statistical modeling. I've had to learn about all of those. I've had to do courses in all of those. And I think that's what education should mean. It's not that you stop learning when you're 22 because you finish university. So talking through the past in ways with this amazing new material available, I think I'm in the most important generation of history writing since the invention of writing scripts because of the material at my disposal. So if you read my book, the reliance and the use on the sciences is completely mind-blowing. It's so incredibly exciting. So even if it's not about shaping policy and response today, it's about showing history in a completely, hopefully, different and exciting way. Right, on that one, I'm going to get never invited back to Lahore. So thank you very much for having me.